The following program is a UWTV classic.
From the University of Washington in Seattle, Upon Reflection.
Hello and welcome to Upon Reflection. I'm Marcia Alvar. The reason children seem to take a special delight in puppetry is because it's theater that's to their scale. That was part of the philosophy behind the founding of the University of Washington's puppetry program in 1930. Aurora Valentinetti spearheaded that department for 50 years, and although she recently retired, Valentinetti has hardly retired from the world of puppetry that she knows and loves so well. Aurora Valentinetti joins us today to talk about the enduring magic of this unique art form and its power to spark the imagination in children of all ages. Welcome to Upon Reflection.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Now, looking at the origin of this art form, do we actually know who was the first puppeteer?
No, we don't. It's all sort of conjecture and made up. But we do know that the puppet actor predates, in many of the countries, particularly the Far East, the human actor.
Now,
So
why would a puppet precede just a human going out on a stage?
Because of religious taboos, primarily.
Ah.
But they're used throughout the world, and this goes back to the day of the oral tradition when, that's the way people learned, by sitting and listening to stories, and that's how their cultures and how everything was passed from generation to generation.
Now, there are a lot of different kinds of puppets, and we have some slides that show different styles of puppets from different countries, and we're going to take a look at a few of those now, and you can just explain to us what we're seeing.
Yes, this slide is of the shadow puppet, and the shadow puppet is probably the oldest puppet, originating either in China or in India, and there's much discussion about that. But this is one from Thailand, and harking back to this is part of the religious activity, he invokes in the prayers the spirit of the gods to come down and bless not only his performance, the puppets themselves, but the people in the audience. So it's a little bit like going to church to go to a puppet show in the old days.
Now, why do they call them shadow puppets? Because did they actually
They
cast
actually
shadows?
cast the shadows. And now, here a beautiful example. These are Chinese, and we have two kinds of shadow puppets, opaque and translucent, and these would appear on the screen, you're just seeing the figures, as a solid black with only the cutout design. But some of the later ones, they use a skin that's transparent, use dye, and there you see color, actual color. So there are two kinds.
And these are, as we can see, actually manipulated by sticks.
With sticks, yes. And these are very complicated. The Chinese, particularly the Peking style, which is smaller, are very difficult. That's one category, the shadow puppets. The second really is the rod puppet. And we again have flat rod puppets, which these are. These are Indonesian clitic puppets. And then we have round rod puppets. And those are manipulated from below with sticks, as you can see. Now we've come back to shadow puppet, and this is contemporary. This is rear screen projection, things done for television, and lots of fascinating things. And we do, for children, a lot of on the overhead projector now. Now we're back to, these are Burmese Rod Puppets, and these are interesting because they have legs. People always really want to make puppets look like themselves, whether they should or not, and so they add legs and sacrifice some other movement. Now these are Chinese hand puppets. There's the other big category. And traditional hand puppet is index finger in the head and thumb and third fingers manipulating the arms of the puppet.
Are these opera puppets?
These are opera puppets, and the stories are the same, whether they're done by people or by puppets. Now, these are the very simplest type of the marionette or the string puppet. These are from the Rajasthani area of India, and they really are controlled only by a loop of thread that's fastened at the top of the head and then at the base of the so-called spine. And they don't have any legs, but the manipulators are very skilled at making them look like they're really moving.
This is a marvelous
Now
puppet.
this is a beautiful one. This is about 4 feet tall, all carved of wood. Not as much manipulation as you might imagine, but there are only 6 strings, and this is the figure of Rama, and all the Indonesian stories center around Rama. Now, in this country, I think we probably respond to the name after Kermit and Miss Piggy. We respond to Punch and Judy, and they're practically synonymous with the word puppet. These are English, and the story as we know it of the traditional Punch and Judy was developed in England after a band of Italian puppeteers got stranded there. But the origin of Punch, of course, is the Pulcinello of the Italian Commedia dell'arte. So they're really Italian. Since I'm Italian, I always have to point that out. And here we move into the 5th category. We have these 4 main categories, but things don't fit neatly into boxes. And this is a beautiful example of the Japanese Bunraku. Dates back to the 9th century, peak of development in the 16th century, and a very fascinating form of puppetry. Large puppets, even life-size, and requiring 3 manipulators.
Now, we looked at puppets from all around the world, but are there places in the world where this tradition is stronger than in other places?
It's been up and down through the ages. Europeans pay much more attention to puppetry than we ever did in this country. We had a period of renaissance during the 20s and the 30s, and it looked like it was going to build to really something big, and then the war interrupted, and that war interrupts all sorts of things, including the life of puppets. And truly, in this country, we've always looked at them as an entertainment for children, but that isn't their origin. Their origin was really for adults. And of course, we have to thank Jim Henson for bringing to the attention of the American public that puppets can also be for adults.
The Muppets were
And
universally
that was
loved.
Yeah, absolutely, all over the world. At a time, the most popular, the most watched television show in the world, in 9 countries, translated all over. So he did a great service, and we owe a lot to Jim Henson. It's what will be preserved that came after the early times will be to his credit.
What drew you to this art form?
A friend of mine, Helen Hamilton, that I'd gone to school with at school, and she said to me one day, come on downstairs, we're working on the puppet show, why don't you come and see what we're doing? I was working in the costume lab upstairs in Denny Hall, so I'd not been down there, and I went down, and I said, oh, isn't this fascinating? I always played with dolls. I'd always done these things, but I'd never done any puppets till I was at the university. And she said, don't you want to try one of these? And I said, well, yeah, they look like fun. How do you do it? I picked up the control. I moved a little, just try it from the bridge. And so I went up on the bridge, and they said, lock the door. You perform next week. And then I was drafted into a marionette production, which is the most difficult kind to do.
Instant career.
Instant career, and we had lost Mel Helstein, who for years taught it in California at UCLA, to the draft and the war, and they needed a substitute person, and it just happened.
Isn't that funny? It's just these
It just
moments
was-
of serendipity that really change your life.
And I stayed. What was sort of half and half about it, because I was the wicked brother. I had the whole 3rd scene all by myself, and I made this very long climb up one ramp, up another ramp, and kicked the dog and kicked the old man. I was just vile. And then when I got to the top, I threw my stolen holy water down into this river to turn it to gold, and instead there was thunder and lightning and blackouts, and I screamed my bloody death, came back up as a big black rock, and the whole of the Showboat Theater erupted in tears. It was a catastrophe. I was chastised for being so mean, and I never got to do it that way again. It was just terrible, and I was crushed. I thought I was doing so well, but scared the kiddies. So I got removed from all villain parts and got to be playing the heroine, the weeping heroine.
Now, when you work with people, you've worked with people of all different ages, both
Right.
adults and children. Do you have to approach the art form differently?
For each age, yes, at each level. I really prefer working with children because they are still in touch with fantasy and magic. I have found a great change in the adults working with puppets now, and it's a very difficult art form.
For adults?
For anybody. And most people don't realize how difficult it is to do the regular productions, the full-scale productions, as we did at the university for years.
What makes it so difficult?
The mechanics of working, for instance, the marionettes. We would rehearse one whole year on our marionette productions. We had a rotating program. We actually toured the schools, the public schools, in 1936 when Lance Davis was teaching puppetry. They had a beautiful custom-made GM truck, and we had puppeteers all sitting in a special seat on top, running through all over town, all over Washington State. And we did, every Thursday and Friday, we took hand puppet shows to the schools. But then, once a year, we mounted a whole new marionette production, and we did it in the spring, 2 or 3 weekends. We revived it in the fall, and in the fall, we began work and worked all year round.
It must be a kind of physical training, almost like an athlete, to be able to manipulate the puppet in the right way.
And some of the best actors at the time, when we were a very integrated group, never got the knack of it. And we had one particularly, Bob Jackson, one of my favorite old puppeteers from the old days, who was one of the top actors. He really was never a good puppeteer, and we joke about it still. And finally we said to him, just get up there and talk and we'll move the puppet for you. He had a difficult time getting it down through the strings. And some people can do it and some people can't. It's really a very complex thing.
Now, we have some examples, some more puppets. These are puppets that you made, and this fellow has been standing patiently waiting to be introduced.
Now, I didn't make this one. This is Oliviero, and he's part of the Sicilian story of Orlando Furioso. This is what we call a fifth category. Everything doesn't fit into niches neatly, and these large puppets sort of are in their own category. And this played the story in the days of King Charlemagne, in the days of the Crusade, and it was a very earthy kind of a thing. It's a beautiful puppet, and when I used to teach my class, and I say, this is to prove to you that this is a man's business and not something that just ladies do. And if you were to hoist this as to lift it, you can barely get it off the floor, let alone manipulate it.
Now, how do you manipulate that puppet?
Well, this has been cut off to make it more convenient, but this rod is usually 3 feet, and then it has the handle. And the puppeteer, with muscles like Atlas, holds it at arm's length.
Oh, my stars.
And moves it around that way. It is not subtle manipulation like the regular marionette.
But there are little strings. I noticed there's one on the sword, for example.
Yes, and there's one. And then he manipulates with that main rod, which he takes in his left hand. Then he has an additional 3-foot rod with a hook. And with that, he reaches down and pulls up the parts that have to move.
Very challenging one
It's
to work
very
on.
difficult and very muscly.
Our second puppet here is quite wonderful.
This is a beautiful puppet from China. And this is one of my favorite puppets. This is a hand puppet. And I love this because it reminds me, I have 100 stories from children that I adored. And this one, I always showed the historical puppets. And I would always hold this up and say, now this is from China, and give it a little background. And I'd say, do you think this is a fairy princess? And of course the children would say, oh no, it's a monster, or something. And in this one instance, this little boy in the back row raised his hand very quietly, a sensitive little child. And I said, yes. And he said, it might be a fairy princess. It might be a princess under enchantment. Those are the magic moments that have kept me going all these years.
Wonderful imagination.
Yeah. Wonderful imagination. And of course, this is why I love to work with children, because they enter into the spirit of things. A lot of adults do too, but they're embarrassed, They don't want to show that they really...
It allows especially shy children
yes.
to sort of come forward.
Right, yes.
So it doesn't involve them.
Them, that's right.
Now the third, this is the one that you made, and this is a very old friend of yours.
This is a very old friend. This is my second puppet that I made. And after I performed first, and then decided I'd make them, and I didn't really approve the techniques they were using, so I sort of went my own way, and had fallen into that too. This is Joy. My first puppet was named Melody because I sang and I made Melody first, and then I made Joy. And Joy actually performed in our marionette production of Pinocchio. However, she did not care for theater life. She retired after her first performance, and she has resided all these many years. She's in pretty good shape for about 40 years.
So these puppets have a life of their own. You don't necessarily get to decide what they do.
No, they know what they're going to do. And she has entertained all my nieces, nephews, godchildren, the whole neighborhood, you know, for years. She's a wonderful little. She keeps me young, you see. So,
we have some other examples of puppets that you made that we're gonna take a look at.
Well, this is the giant from Jack and the Beanstalk. I could train puppeteers more readily on hand puppets than I could with the marionettes. We had to work all year, but we could do in a quarter or two a hand show. And sometimes we mixed. This was the giant from the hand show, but this really is a rod puppet, and sometimes we combined hand and rod because the size of this was almost the size of a human head. And our proscenium opening was very large. It was 5 feet across. And the other puppets were quite small in comparison. When the giant first made his appearance, the children would just gasp.
He's pretty ferocious looking.
Yeah, he's very ferocious looking. And when he leaned over the front of the stage and sniffed at the audience, we used to take turns watching because all the little children would disappear as he was sniffing.
Under the seats.
But you know, he was so stupid and so bumbling, and he got caught under the table so that Jack could escape. But I love my sort of bumbly, ugly ones. He's a wonderful one. This was an interesting trio that I custom made for a fundraiser for the Seattle Symphony. And because we just gave our time, devotion, energy, and spent 3 months on it, I thought I'm going to really keep track of how many hours it takes to make one, because if you have any sense, you don't, you know. And I did, and each one of those puppets represented 200 hours of work.
Now this is a really astonishing example.
This set of everyman puppets, and I must tell you that Dr. Peter Halleck of St. Mark's Cathedral is really responsible for our doing this beautiful production, which for me has been most gratifying artistically, and it really is for adults. This is the one thing we did for adults. These are life-size puppets requiring 2 manipulators facing each other, and we actually opened in Berkeley at the Divinity School there, and then played St. Mark's, and we've done many productions. We've been invited to perform all over, but it's built not to travel, but it's a beautiful show.
When I first looked at that puppet, I said, "Oh, that's Spider-Man." Looked a little bit like Spider-Man.
Yes, it represents the stained glass windows of the church. Drama began in the church, and I just felt, oh, that he represents all men. He's all races, all colors. And so we chose that design for that particular one.
There's such a range of productions that you've worked on. I mean, from the morality play of Every Man to Pinocchio, which I suppose in and of itself is a morality play.
Yes.
Can you use puppets for anything, or are there certain plays, certain types of productions that they just won't work in?
No, they'll work for anything. I haven't found anything. Some types work better than others. Now, Every Man and the Rod Puppets are for serious things. You don't do slapstick comedy because of the limitations of the figure.
Although Punch and Judy
are hand puppets, and you can do anything. That's why they hit, you see, with hand puppets, and they're the comedians of the puppet family. Everything has its limitations, but as tools for teaching, they are powerful. And I've done a whole series of things, show for the National Park Service to teach about the outdoors and our environment. I did a show that has been very well received for the Diabetes Society to teach children about what diabetes is and all kinds of things. So you can adapt it for any subject matter. I get a little tired of its being used as a candy-coated pill to teach everything under the sun. I would really like to have a balance between a teaching tool and theater and the magic of storytelling.
That goes back to something that we talked about a little while ago, and the fact that puppetry seems to be a more integral part of the theater in different countries around the world, and has had some trouble in this country reaching that level of acceptance. Can you talk a bit more about why
Part of that is that puppetry is an intimate theater art form. I mean, yes, we have this, and yes, we have the Everyman, and when we did Everyman in St. Mark's Cathedral, that dictated the size of the puppets. I would not have chosen to do that size necessarily, because I had done a nativity with 2-foot puppets that worked very well. But when we took it to St. Mark's, then we had to go to the big size. But it is intimate, and the bottom line in this country is money, and you can't make money when you have a small theater and auditorium. And that's one reason it certainly did not catch on. It's not economically sound. And of course then when Henson moved it to television, we're talking about something else. But that's the real problem of it. You change the style that you use, for instance. The detail, the magic of seeing a traditional marionette show, which is between 18 to 24 inches, which really comes to life and you really believe it, that loses something when you go to the Civic Auditorium and you're forced to go to these monstrous puppets that are just big, galloping kind of statue type things.
I wondered too if there isn't something in our culture that makes it hard for us to be behind the scenes, because that's really where the magic of this art form takes place.
Yes, and that's
the artist has to stay out of the spotlight.
Yes, that's why I always say, pity the poor puppeteer, because he never gets the credit for anything unless the show goes badly, you know. But people think they do it all by themselves. That's why I've had a hard time getting drama majors to be puppeteers. They cannot hide behind. And you have to become the soul of that figure, and you don't count. You do the mechanics, and you give your life to that figure. But it's hard for beginning actors to do that.
You've talked about the late Jim Henson and being one of your heroes. Who are some other leaders in the field, people who really made a difference in puppetry and how it developed?
Well, I suppose we need to go to Tony Sarg. Was one of the pioneers. He was actually, it was English, but he worked in this country. And Martin Stevens, I was very much influenced by Martin Stevens and by Rufus Rose. Those people are all gone now. There's hardly anybody left of the pioneers during that period. But Rufus Rose worked in the traditional Italian style, which was beautiful carving and beautiful stuff. And he was my one inspiration. When I did Pinocchio, I almost literally copied some of his puppets because they were so beautiful. And I wanted my puppets to look like that and not like some of the other kinds of things. So there have been many puppeteers, but if you look overall, it's just a small handful.
Are you worried about the future of this art form in this country?
No, because there'll always be someone who will take up the slack. And we've had so many of them. Walton and O'Rourke, another that I have done a great deal with them, who did a lot of nightclub kind of work. And actually, Mike O'Rourke stated, he said, when one person puts down the control, someone else is going to come along and pick it up, and it'll continue. And it has continued through the ages, and I don't worry. The styles may change, things may change, but it'll always be there, just like theater will always be there in one form or the other.
It's almost as long as somebody can,
somebody can
make
move
a little
and
puppet.
do something,
there
it'll be there. It'll be there.
If it didn't survive for some reason, what would we lose?
We'd lose a great deal. Now, children would lose something to reinforce for them their sense of imagination. I shouldn't badmouth TV, but I have very
go ahead.
I have very strong feelings about TV. My mother gave me, to tell you how strong, my mother decided she'd buy me a television set for Christmas so I'd stay home more. It took me 6 months to go and get one because my sister told me, Mama's very hurt because you haven't got your TV. I got a VCR for my 70th birthday. I'm going to be 72 pretty soon, and I haven't connected it yet. I think they're wonderful things, but we depend on them so much today. And a child watching TV is a passive observer. And a lot of it goes in here and goes out there. What was so wonderful about radio, when we used to cluster around radio, is that you made it all in your head. And with puppets, children don't have much now where they can make it happen in here. I should tell you, Marcia, this wonderful little boy, I have a big poster in my room and downstairs and all over the place of Albert Einstein. And at the bottom is one of my favorite sayings of his, of which there have been many. Imagination is more important than knowledge. And this little boy was there. I had a whole classroom of kids. And we looked at the poster and discussed it, and I said, well, now do you know what that means? And this one little boy said, yes, yes. And I said, well, what does it mean? And you know, you could see the wheels turning and everything going. And finally he said, you can't see it. It's all in here. It's like the child that said it might be an enchanted princess. It's that kind of thing that we'll lose for children if we can't have this that isn't all there with a button, with a what do you call those batteries, you know, push the buttons and stuff, you know. And I know that this is critical because I can tell you in my classes at the university, the manual skills have taken a nosedive. They don't make things out of scraps anymore and butter boxes and stuff like we used to do.
Great thumbs, though.
Yeah, yeah, great thumbs. But also the imagination is not there. Because when you create things, that's when it all gets going, you see. And I have university kids that I just, could hardly beat. Oftentimes I used to call them my kindergarten class, you know. It is going to make a difference if we don't get away from all this mechanical stuff and really call on the resources that we all have.
The dominance of television, we've also had a lot of cutbacks in the arts in recent years. And
dreadful.
We have very little time left, but I wanted to ask you, what are the implications of those two things for the audiences of the future, the children of today?
Dismal, dismal. Without the arts, we are going to be robots or back to the level of animals. After all of the arts, that's what makes the human being unique. And we need it desperately. And I just don't understand, I've given up trying to figure it out, why people haven't understood that real learning happens through all of the arts, and particularly for young children. You see, that's where they grow and expand. And that also is where children can be individuals.
Aurora Valentinetti, you've worked for many years in this form of theater that you love so well. I wish you many more.
Thank you. I hope I will have many more.
Thank you for being a guest on Upon Reflection.
And thank you for having me.
To see more UWTV classics, visit uwtv.org/classics.